So just a general discussion today about zoning. Um, Whether you're a commercial agent or a residential agent, zoning is the foundation of the rules regarding every piece of land that we can find, whether it's residential, agricultural, industrial, commercial. Every property that we deal with has some type of zone that governs it. So it's an important topic, and understanding it is pretty vital for us to be able to guide clients and understand value, figure out, future value, how to identify opportunities. And so it's a great topic. Um, the basis of it is that the municipalities and the provincial and federal governments all have a role to play when it comes to zoning. Even the governing agencies like the conservation authorities, they all have a role to play and have some type of influence in what a zone is, and why. So um, basically, the zoning outlines our permitted uses, non-permitted uses, and once we identify the zone and we understand where to find the information, we can identify all of those particulars, what we're allowed to do, even down to things like setbacks, maximum number of units that can be created on a piece of land, or possible restrictions. So the zoning particulars is a way for the governance system to attempt to govern and organize land and how we use it. I say attempt because um, there's there's no perfect planning in any municipality. Every city, every municipality out there has uses that are always changing, and the zone of each property is dictated by those uses. And because uses are forever changing, there too, zoning can also change. If let's say historically an area within a city or municipality was used for industrial, let's say industrial use, as things progress, perhaps there was more residential use in the area and surrounding that industrial property or that industrial zone, and there becomes a new highest and best use for the land. And then there's pressure that's put on the land and the municipality from that use by the public, supply and demand, to change the zone to a different use. So it's just an example going from industrial to residential, but these things happen in every municipality all the time, and things are forever changing. Now, some zones are set in stone, and there's let's say it's a residential use, and there's nothing but residential, as far as the eye can see. Obviously that zone will probably remain residential for a long time. But that doesn't mean that the particular zone or the subtype might not change. So let's say it's residential, but let's take the city of Ottawa, for example. There's a mandate to increase density, and that zone now, perhaps that zone gets moved from R1 to R2, so that people are now permitted to create more units on that land, and increase the density. That's something that happens quite a bit. So you can see, as residential or commercial real estate professionals, these zones are that govern every piece of property that we look at. They're they're our rule book, if you will, to what can be done on that piece of land. And most importantly, it affects the value greatly of what we can do on that land affects the value, and the more permitted uses or the highest and best use creates more value. A higher density is going to create more value. It's, it's the reason that a downtown Ottawa property that's zoned R4 that obviously has higher density is worth more than something in the suburbs that's, RU, rural countryside, or even R1. So just general discussion, please, anyone stop me if they've got an example or if they got a question about any of the zoning types. I'm just looking at general discussion for your information, and hopefully I'll identify a few things that you can take away.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, if
You have something? Yeah.
I did have a question. Yeah, I did. I guess my question being with, the city's plans for increasing density, getting a minor variance or getting a property rezoned, what are your typical time periods and costs associated with that before you've even been approved for, let's say, like getting an actual site plan done?
Great question. So it might be a lengthy answer, but I'll try to stick on topic. It's different in every municipality. Whether you're working in a large metropolitan city or you're working in a secondary market. I'm going to use the Ottawa and surrounding areas as an example. Whether you're working in the city of Ottawa or you're working in Kemptville, it's going to be different. You mentioned a site plan. Some municipalities will allow you to file an application for a site plan concurrently with your zoning application. If you've got a piece of land that doesn't have the correct zone for what you're looking to build, let's say you want to build an apartment building, but you're on a piece of R1 land, which is residential first density, let's call it, which wouldn't allow for an apartment building, but you've got a property that's surrounded by other apartments or some close by, and you think you can change the zone. Some municipalities like Ottawa will let you submit your zoning application at the same time as your site plan application. That would take less time than but some municipalities will make you file both separately. You might have to go for your zoning application first. Let's just say we're in a secondary market, so I've built apartment buildings in a lot of secondary markets. I'll just name off a few areas so that you understand, what kind of areas we're talking about. Picton, Brockville, Prescott, Winchester, Alfred, Carleton Place. Right now I'm working in Kemptville. Some of these areas, if you have to file a new zoning application, that might take 6 to 8 months. And then once you obtain the zoning, then you can go for your site plan application, which may take another 6 to 8 months. And every municipality is a little bit different. I've obtained zoning and site plan approval concurrently in Picton, let's say, and I both within 8 months time. A lot of the time it has to do with how quickly you can gather your information for the site plan application. So, in order to make the application, you have to have, let's say you're building an apartment building or a condominium, you have to have all of your engineering in place, everything in place to make that complete application. That could take you, from 4 to 8 months or longer if you're not, on top of your engineers and consultants. And then once you make the application, the Ontario government is trying to force people and municipalities to make decisions within 6 months time right now. If you make an application for a site plan, the municipalities are supposed to be able to grant approval within 6 months time, or there can be some penalties for the municipality. They might forego your development charges and that sort of thing. So complicated question, with the timing for zoning. It doesn't have to be that long if you have a property that has got the correct zone, but perhaps you just need a minor variance. Like, let's say you've got a property that's in the R4 zone that that you can build an apartment building, but you're just asking for some type of variance from that zone. Maybe it's a variance on setback, or if it's a variance for density, you might be able to file just a minor zoning amendment, and you might be able to obtain it in a matter of a couple months. So complex question, but it is very involved. Let's maybe talk about a big city like the city of Ottawa. A full rezone, let's say, zoning application, it could easily take a year's time. But it really depends on the property and what you're looking to do with it, and what the current zoning is versus what you're looking to do. If you're changing, and this happens frequently, if you're changing from a commercial or an industrial zone and you want to go to residential is a more stringent zone. It's probably the most stringent zone. It aims to protect residential homeowners. So if you're going from industrial, where there's potential for contamination through manufacturing, or even just retail, and there's some type of processing, or we've all seen the environmental hazards with dry cleaners or something to that effect. If you're going from a commercial or industrial use to a residential use, you have to go through a process known as a record of site condition. So in this particular instance, you're going to go through your zoning application on that piece of land. Your zoning application is going to have even more studies or particular reports that you're going to have to create to prove that the land is suitable to rezone to residential and allow people to live there. In that particular case, going from industrial to residential, you're going to have to do something called a record of site condition. I'll repeat that. It's a record of site condition, or an RSC, and that will force you to not only do the an environmental site assessment, but it will force the governing body, either the Ministry of the Environment or the governing conservation authority, to be involved in that record of site condition process. And they may have to go back and forth. It can take a year, it could take 2 years, depending on how your environmental report went, and if there's any environmental remediation necessary. If you did any remediation, that you will have to go back and forth with the ministry, or the Ministry of the Environment, until they deem the property completely suitable for residential development, and they basically give it a clean bill of health. And I've seen that take up to 2 or 3 years if there's a property that's actually got any contamination on it. So lengthy question and answer, unfortunately, because not all properties are alike. But it ranges from a simple zoning amendment, where you can just get a minor variance for a very simple setback relief, or a density, a minor density change, and that can happen in a matter of months, to the other end of the spectrum, where we're changing the zone from an industrial property to a residential, and that can take a matter of years. So tough question, but I hope that kind of speaks.
No, that was great.
To it.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and it's really important to understand zoning, and when we're looking for properties, often logic prevails. If we've got a client that's looking at an industrial property and they want to build an apartment building or something with a residential use, you have to know that logic and good planning will usually prevail. If there's a property that is surrounded by contamination or it's surrounded by industrial use, you got to know that the planners on the city or the municipality, they don't they're not going to see that as a good fit. They like to group zones together. If there's industrial properties, they're usually looking to group those together and surround it with other industrial properties. But sometimes you'll see industrial or commercial properties that have been that zone for a long, long time. And, residential is becoming emerging to be a higher and better use or a more prominent or dominant use in the area. And that's when we're going to, look at zoning changes towards residential. Obviously, we all know how much demand there is for residential building right now, and zoning plays a big part of that. But normally, logic will prevail. So you kind of look at it holistically and say, okay, this is the property that I've found. My client wants to build X. How does that use fit the surrounding area? Are there other properties in the area? A lot of people are always trying to figure out what R1, R2, R3, R4 are. That's basically in the city of Ottawa anyways, those are residentially zoned properties. And the number usually suits the density. R1, you can usually build one unit. R2, maybe it's zoned for duplexes. R3, maybe it's triplexes and maybe up to 6 units. This is not set in stone, the density for each municipality, because but R4 is typically, you can do almost anything you would like. It's probably an apartment building. And then you'll figure out the density based on the zone or your actual site specific application. But if you've got an R1 property, I said it's first densities for a single unit, but now we know that the city of Ottawa has just allowed secondary units in all the residential zones in the city. So any R1 can have a single dwelling unit and can also have a secondary dwelling unit in that same dwelling within an R1 zone. So but let's say in the instance that you found a property and it's a double wide lot in an R1 zone. The lot's bigger than all the other lots in the area. And you've got a client that wants to build a triplex. Well, you got to look at the other properties immediately surrounding it. And if you see that a bunch of other properties on that same street have obtained a different zone, then you probably have a pretty decent chance of obtaining that R2 or R3 zone based on precedence of other people doing the same thing. And it's really comes down to logic and good planning and grouping similar properties together. And but if you're trying to put a residential property in the very center of an industrial park, you have to understand that that's not likely going to work, and you're going to waste a lot of time and energy for you and the client. What else could we chat about here? The zones that, obviously create or identify value. The higher the density, the more value it creates. If a builder can come in, they don't have to change the zone. They can just go straight to applying for their site plan application. That's time and money saved for them, and that property is going to be worth more. So, identifying properties for our clients that have those potential are actually creating value for them, and it's important to know how to find them. Let me ask you, you both, if you were going to look for a specific zone, where would you look? How do you find your information on zoning?
Is it Geo Ottawa?
Absolutely. If you're in Ottawa, Geo Ottawa is our Bible. I'll share my screen in a moment if I can, and absolutely Geo Ottawa is our Bible. If we're outside of the city of Ottawa, which is, even all the surrounding areas, could be Arnprior, Pakenham, Carleton Place, Salmont, Kempville, these surrounding areas, unfortunately, aren't in the city of Ottawa, so they won't show up on Geo Ottawa. In that case, every one of those municipalities now has some type of planning infrastructure, and the Geo Ottawa is amazing because it's all on one map, and it's an interactive map that you can open and close layers to find all the information you're looking for. But some of those other smaller municipalities aren't as well organized, but they usually will have, if anything, a link to their planning department and a link to their official plan or their zoning documents and maps. So some of them are organized. What was that?
I'm sorry, I just bumped into somebody.
Oh, that's okay.
I should have muted it. Hold on.
All good. So some of those other smaller communities, you'll still be able to find the information. It might not be as fast. It might be a zoning map that you get a broad area and you understand that it's, zoned employment lands, and then you have to go to the official plan of the municipality and figure out what zoning, what employment lands entails and what that zone is. When that's the case with these other municipalities, if there's any question about what the zone is with the particular property, you have to contact the municipality directly, talk to the planning department or a zoning department, and figure out, make sure that you know the exact zone of the property and what you can do in it. You cannot rely on geo warehouse zoning. Geo warehouse, I believe, is provincial jurisdiction. I know it's our link to the land registry, and if you look on it, it's going to have one item on there that has some affiliation to a zone. It's going to say, residential zoning. But the provincial designation that Geo Warehouse seems to put on it is not something that we can go by. It doesn't say the specific zone, and sometimes it doesn't actually match the municipal zone. So the municipalities have a heavier role in dictating their zones and managing them. So you have to go to the municipal or the city level to understand the zoning. But Geo Ottawa is absolutely the tool that we use in Ottawa. I'm gonna share my screen now, and I'm gonna pull it up because I think it's a great tool. Let me know when everybody. Can you guys see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Geo Ottawa. Sounds like you're familiar with it, and that's a good thing. It's an amazing tool. I'm just gonna go and take a quick peek at a few things, zone or non-zoning related, because I think this is incredible information. This is basically the layer list. If you haven't played around with it, obviously the zoning is a layer, and that's got to be turned on to understand what zone you're in. I always turn on property parcels, and most of the other things that we're looking for are in the planning. And it's important to note that there's a drop-down menu on each one of these headings. If I work on this, if I click on this small little sub layer in planning, you'll see all these other layers that can be turned on that are under the planning subheading. And it's important to note that let's say regulations and natural systems, I want to see them. I've got them turned on. If the main heading is not turned on, those, even though those natural systems and those subcategories are turned on, they won't show up. So the main one has to be identified as well. I'm going to turn a few things off here, but before I do, I want to, it's kind of a precursor to maybe another training that I'll do. Zoning, it's important you see right here, the water and the wastewater infrastructure. That's very important. Even when we're looking, for property or zoning, a piece of development land, let's say, if even if the zone is there, identifying whether or not water or wastewater infrastructure is really important to understand, you know, how the cost of development. So, you know, and just because we're right inside the city doesn't mean that a parcel is perfect for development. You might be able to obtain a new zone because it's, you know, or the correct zone you're looking for. But if the water and the wastewater infrastructure is not there, you're going to have to, you know, spend money on a solution. So just as an example, this is the Scotiabank place. And let's say this parcel of land. Okay, this is along Palladium Drive. It's obviously a great piece of future development land. We can go ahead and identify the zone, figure out what it is by clicking on it. The zone is GM 22. And we can get a link directly to that zone by clicking on link to bylaw text. And then going down to, sometimes the city of Ottawa changes it and it'll link directly to that, the place within the zone. But right now their links are a little bit weird. And I've got to scroll until I find that GM zone. So I'll go back. It was GM 22. Go to the link, and I'm at GM 30. So I'll scroll until I find GM 22, and I'll tell you what that is. GM is basically. Let's see if I go right to the top of this zone. To identify exactly what it is.
It really is a great tool, though.
It's amazing. So
really
GM is general mixed use. I'll scroll back until we find the particular GM 22 that we had identified, and here is the subzone. Permitted uses are all of these. I won't host them all, or I won't, you know, recite them all, but automobile dealership, restaurant. There's a few. Now, I know this particular piece of land. The city has a greater master plan that will also allow residential on the property, but it will have to go through a you know, some type of zoning mechanism, a zoning amendment to achieve that. But this will bring up all of the setbacks and anyway, so that's a link directly to the zone. But going back to the water and the wastewater infrastructure, even though this is a great piece of development land, you'll notice there's a water main out front, but there is not sewer and stormwater directly on the property. You can always go, so we've got wastewater infrastructure on, you can always go directly to your legend to see what, you know, what things are. Obviously there's some storm manholes here that are green. There's some sanitary manholes on the neighboring property. So there's sewer close by, but not right on the frontage where you might expect it. So, and maybe that's further down the road on some other properties. So anyway, in order to understand the zone and to, you know, to understand property's development potential, those are a couple of key pieces of information that everything's kind of connected. If there's no water or wastewater infrastructure around, you're going to have a harder time obtaining a higher density because, you know, let's say you're in the country or whatever, and you find a nice parcel, but you find that there's no, like, look, all this density's right here. This is a big Minto development. But let's say you find a piece of land over here, even though you think you're close, there's no water and no sewer, you're going to have a hard time obtaining a zone that will allow for high density or even, you know, medium density, low density residential. You might be, you know, you might have to understand that property might only be suited for estate lot subdivisions where they're on their own well and septic. Tidbit of information with zoning and estate lot subdivisions in Ottawa right now is there's a moratorium on country estate lot creation. If you don't know, that means you cannot even apply to make an estate lot subdivision. So you might find a great piece of land in the RU zone, which we know, you know, it might allow for, you know, a rezoning in theory, but because you can't apply for an estate lot subdivision, there's very little other uses that you can do with that RU zone. This is probably ag, but, and it is. You know, if we find something in the ag zone, another thing, you know, one thing to understand there is it's very hard to rezone agricultural land. It's very protected by both the municipality and the provinces. Agricultural lands, very sought after or very protected. So the only, it can be changed eventually, but you'll see, I'm in the west end of Ottawa right now, by the way, on my Geo Ottawa site. And as an example, this is the Big Minto development. This is the Tanger Mall and all that light industrial or commercial that's popping up along here. These farmlands, even though they're agricultural, at some point in time, these will be the next ones in the West End to be converted to residential. It just makes good planning sense to, you know, this is a big residential development. Likely at some point in time, as the city grows, these are the next ones that will be converted. So it's not often that you'll see them skip a bunch of, you know, agricultural land and then that's right next to the city, and then all of a sudden rezone a piece of agricultural land further to residential. They you know, they do it sequential. They like to do it in the path of progress so that they don't have urban sprawl and all of a sudden you've got like satellite nodes popping up. So you know, it's good planning to have the city grow out and, you know, keep identifying the next best parcel to develop is usually next to the parcels that have already been developed instead of skipping vast amounts of land and having that urban sprawl. So anyway, I'm going to turn water and wastewater off just because I like to toggle them on and off, and we can talk about some other things. We've chatted about that. Maybe I'll go in and identify a couple of other. Now these are environmental constraints, but they're all zone related. You know, this particular section right here, you can see some floodplain, and we might actually, let me go to where I know there's some actually protected floodplain. Let's so we're in Carp here. This is my backyard. I'm a West Ender, and anyway, Carp for life. It's a wonderful little community. But up in the Carp Hills, you'll see a lot of lakes and a lot of you know, wetlands. There's a lot of really interesting habitat up there. And if I click on that zone, I'm going to see that the entire zone is EP3. Click on it once and you'll see all of the connected lands within that zone and anything in the same zone that's connected to that zone. And now there might be some EP3 that's a little bit further, but it won't be identified if it's not connected. You'll have to go in and specifically identify it. But you know, this is a zone that EP3, if you see EP3, it's environmentally protected. You have to know that there's not a whole lot that they're going to want you to do in that zone. It's protected for a reason. And that's EP is environmentally protected. It's usually governed by municipal and provincial protection. You know, that's not to be confused with just a small piece of this blue right here, let's say. There's no zone around this. If I click on it, the zone itself. This is another thing to note. When you click on something in Geo Ottawa, the zone might not pop up first, but you toggle right over here on this little arrow, and that'll link you over to the zone. But if you were just on that, the other section, the other arrow, it's going to bring you to the property report. But we toggle over onto the zone. You'll see this is all AG2. It's not zone provincially significant or environmentally protected wetland. But what we see here is a little bit of blue, and if we go to our layer or our legend, it'll show that it's unevaluated wetland. So they're here. The municipality, in conjunction probably with the conservation authority, has identified this as potentially being wet. It's not evaluated, but even unevaluated land, if you go to make an application with something there, it will trigger involvement with the conservation authority for your building permit or your zoning application, whatever you're looking to do. Same thing with this black hatched area. These are regulated limits, and they often act as a buffer around, in this instance here, looks like a creek or a ditch. In this instance right here, you've got unevaluated wetlands and a buffer beyond that unevaluated wetland where the municipality as well as the conservation authority has jurisdiction to, further scrutinize and review any applications for any building or development or zoning changes within those areas. So absolutely, in the city of Ottawa, Geo Ottawa is our Bible and our rule book. And it very quickly identifies all the zones on all the pieces of land and the parcels in the area, and it's great to work in an organized community like this. Most of the major cities are like that. If you head to Toronto, there's very similar systems, but certainly in the city of Ottawa, it's our zoning Bible for sure. Any questions with Geo Ottawa or any of the zones that we've talked about in the meantime?
Not for me, Chris. Thank you. That was good. Yeah. It was very helpful. Thank you.
We've gone through quite a bit, quite quickly. Obviously, a lot of these topics can be expanded, based on so many factors, different costs of different studies to change a zone or making an application in a different zone, what things qualify for, zoning amendments and that sort of thing. But Geo Auto is an amazing place to start. It'll, give us obviously the zone and everything in the zone, from permitted uses, non-permitted uses, restrictions, density, floor area ratio, like maximum coverage, how the percentage of coverage of a lot that can be achieved, building heights, setbacks, all those things. And when in doubt, if you've you got a property that you even have a question with whether you're in the right zone or what can be done there, don't hesitate to call the city. I find that so many agents don't call the city, but it's really something you should have on speed dial. Quick question to the zoning department or the planning department. They're there to help, and they're gonna let you know. Maybe there's a future rezoning happening in an area, and you're asking if something can be permitted. It's not permitted in the current zone that shows up on Geo Ottawa, but maybe there's a class action that there is a zoning review in place, and a particular question to a planning official in that area will help you identify, trends and future potential. So don't hesitate to call the city if you've got any questions. They're there. So, these things, a zone, kind of, I keep going back to the zoning changes question, I guess, so that you understand, who governs it. Obviously, the municipality plays a role, but you can run it right up to the provincial level, and ultimately, I think the OMB will make have a role to play in the final decisions. If the municipality's giving you a hard time on a particular zone or zoning changes, the OMB, which is the Ontario Municipal Board, will have some say in the final decision of zoning at a provincial level as well. So Yeah. That's quite a bit of info pretty quickly. I don't know if I gave you a major overview or not. You know, there's there's a whole host of different zones, and every um, category, so to speak, has subzones. Industrial, commercial, traditional Main Street, which is, you know, a very open zone. And traditional Main Street, there's often a lot of different uses, whether it's residential, um, commercial, retail, um, all sorts of things, but right down to environmentally protected land, wetlands, recreational land. There's probably hundreds of different zones that dictate what we can do in all the different areas, and they're um, they're important to understand. So um, anyway, I hope this is Ashley. You seem to be the last Mohican. We just lost our other colleague here. Do you have any questions before I wrap up?
No, I just wanted to thank you. And the reason why I was probably silent is because I just got in my car. I'm off to visit now.
No worries, no worries. If anything, hopefully this has prompted some thought process in the matter, and have you
A
understand
100%.
how important the zoning is. But feel free to reach out to me anytime. I think this will be available as well in the past training links, so you can go back to it anytime and review it. But thanks for participating, and give me a shout anytime. I'm here to help everybody along the way. Our Northern Alliance is becoming a great group for us all, and I'm happy to help.